If the whole scene hadn't been so routine to him by now, he would have found it hilarious. Or horrifying. Probably hilarious. He whipped up the macaroni and cheese as promised. After dinner he was standing at the sink, washing dishes, and idly gazing out the back window at the old abandoned bird bath, when Grandma suddenly marched up to him at the sink and smacked him on the back of the head. "For back-talking me!" she shrieked. Jas gripped the edge of the sink and told himself not to spin around, not to strike back at her. She was a weak old woman. He was a strong young man. One blow from him would cripple, if not kill her. Another blow landed. Jas kept washing the dishes. A beating from Grandma was more an inconvenience than anything else. He let her pinwheel her bony arms at him until she tired and staggered back to lean against the kitchen table, clutching her chest and breathing in ragged gasps. The chest clutching was new. Was she about to have a heart attack, right here and now? Jas didn't know how he felt about that. No one would weep when Grandma died. Dead, she would be nothing more than another body on the Dent family's roster of them. Alive, though, like Melissa said, maybe his caring for Grandma would somehow redeem her, or his father, or himself. Maybe in caring for her, he would observe something, learn something about his lineage, something that would give him some sort of insight into his father and his own upbringing. Anything. Something to help him figure out how to avoid a future that, on Sundays, felt inevitable. A future that ran thick with blood. Or maybe more likely, just like your daddy, Grandma gasped, fumbling into a chair, having apparently decided not to die. You're just like your daddy. Now that hurt. More than a beating ever could. After getting Grandma washed up and tucked in for the night, Jas finally allowed himself to collapse on his bed. But not for long. He had plans to make for his excursion back to the crime scene. He scoped the area out on Google Earth, even though he knew it well already. Then he carefully packed a small duffel bag with everything he thought he and Howie would need. Had he forgotten anything? He tilted back in his desk chair, thinking, staring at the walls. Long ago, he taped up images of his father's victims. 123 photos, clipped from newspapers, printed off the web, surreptitiously photocopied from G. Williams files. He told himself it was a reminder of what could happen if he ever lost control. In that roster of the dead was a 124th photo. This one taped between Billy's 80th and 81st official kills. That was Jas's best guess as to when Billy had killed the woman in the photo. Jas's own mother. The photo was all that remained of her, that and a few scanty memories of her from when he was much younger. The dog, Rusty, that she'd given him as a puppy, the smell of cupcakes in the oven, the tang of her homemade lemon frosting. That was it. He remembered so little about her that based on Grandma's comments and Billy's actions, there was only one reasonable conclusion. His mother had been the one good thing in his life, and even though he had precious few memories of that good thing, he would kill or die to keep them. The police could find no evidence that Billy had killed Mom. No one could. She was officially a missing person, and her case was colder than popsicles on New Year's Eve. Jas only knew that one day she'd been in his life and the next she'd been gone. He had been 8 years old, and when he asked Billy, "Where's Mom?" Billy had simply shrugged and said, "She went away." That's all Billy would ever say, no matter how Jas asked. He could beg and plead. "She went away." Weep and bawl. "She went away." Threaten and rage. "She went away." All that remained were the half-remembered snippets of his childhood. Did anyone ever remember their childhood with perfect clarity? Jas wasn't sure, but his own was staticky and foggy. Billy's lessons remained, of course, the day he met Howie, what had happened to Rusty. But so much else was just muddy, a river of images and thoughts and feelings, dirtied and polluted so that no one could drink from it without gagging. And that one memory or dream or both, he didn't know which it was, but it felt so real. The knife, the voice. Billy's voice, he knew, telling him to take the knife. Billy's hands, guiding his own. Billy's voice again. A knife. a knife and flesh, and the flesh parts, and he feels the resistance of it. And how does he know? How does he know the resistance of flesh? Another voice drawn tight in pain. A gasp. Of all his victims, Billy refused to talk at all about Janice Dent. Par for the course. Serial killers pretended to confess, but they never really told the truth. Going back to olden days. Back in the 19th century, H. Holmes confessed to killing 27 women during the Chicago World's Fair, but police were convinced he'd murdered more than 100. Jas knew killers. Billy had studied the serial killers of the past, the way painters study the Renaissance masters. He learned from their mistakes. He obsessed over them, and he passed his knowledge down to his son. Lucky Jas. Those were the things he remembered from his childhood. Killers always held something back. They couldn't help themselves. Jas's mom was Billy's holdback. Other than the 124 victim pictures, there was only one other photo in the room. This one, of someone still living, was a black and white photo of a pretty, slender teenager dressed in a prim dress, wearing a pillbox hat and carrying a small clutch purse. She was standing in front of a church, smiling at the camera. His grandmother as a young woman, years before she begat a monster. Jas followed the chronology of Billy's career, reciting the name of each victim from memory as he gazed at the pictures. Cassie Overton, he began. Farrah Gordon. Harper McLeod. He ended back at Grandma's old photo. Someday, he murmured. Someday I could snap. I'm my father's son. It could happen. And when that day comes, when I take my first victim, it could even be you. He suppressed himself by crying, but he wasn't sure if it was for his grandmother or for himself. He didn't like thinking about killing her, but he couldn't help it. It felt good. She was a horrible person. She'd given the world the artist, Green Jack, whichever nickname he wanted to use for dear old Dad. He wanted to figure out what made her tick, but he also wanted her gone from the face of the planet. Maybe then, maybe, he wouldn't feel so guilty. But he knew that wasn't true. He would always feel guilty. He hadn't been able to protect his own mother. He hadn't been able to help that kid, the one at the drugstore who collapsed at his feet. He should have killed Billy in his sleep years ago. God knows he knew how to do it. Billy had been instructing Jas in the fine, gory art of murder since Jas was old enough to walk. He could handle knives, guns, hatchets, hammers. Billy had kept an old hand drill in a kitchen cabinet, and Jas could have drilled right into his father's brain while dear old Dad slept. Could have done it and saved the world the gruesome murders that followed. People said to him, "You were 13. You knew right from wrong. You knew what he was doing was wrong. Why didn't you stop him?" But what they could never understand was that killing was only wrong for other people, not for Billy, and not for Jas. That's how he'd been raised, brainwashed, duped, whatever word you wanted to use. That was. He rolled over in bed and stared at the wall, finding Harriet Klein's picture. Green eyes, like he remembered. Bringing back Harriet Klein was impossible, and there was nothing he could tell Jeff Fulton that would make the poor man's soul, wretched life, any better. But there was a way to atone, Jas knew, for his father's sins and for his own. Jane Doe's killer was still out there. "I'm going to catch you," Jas whispered. "I'll track you down no matter how crazy it is, no matter how crazy it makes me." Because ultimately, he would rather be that kind of crazy than his grandmother's.